This is the Person of Interest podcast, where we meet extraordinary people with a story to tell.
Welcome back to the Stockholm School of Economics here in Riga for another of our podcasts, in which we talk to people who are eminent in their field, highly qualified, know what they're talking about. And my guest today definitely knows what he's talking about, and he can prove it because he's just spent the last 3 or 4 years proving it single-handed. His name is Gints Zilbalodis. Welcome, Gint.
Hi.
And he is, well, here is where I get to the problem, because I could say filmmaker, I could say animator, I could say composer, I could say cinematographer, I could say about 100 different things which are usually listed in the credits of a movie. But you've produced a movie where the credits are considerably shorter because it seems you did basically everything.
Yeah, pretty much. I think filmmaker is the best way to describe me, because also, even though it's animation, I think animation is part of filmmaking, and I didn't really think of myself as animator. I'm more interested in the directing part and the storytelling. And in the industry, animators are mostly known, they're the actors who do the acting through the puppets or the drawings, and I do many different things. And for me, animation is just what I'm interested in right now. I've also done live action filmmaking. I've done some documentary, so just animation is this project.
Well, at the time that we're speaking, the Riga International Film Festival is on, and it was actually opened by your latest film, which is called Away. That must have been a pretty special moment for you, particularly on home ground, as it were.
Yeah, it was. I've been going to many festivals this year. I think Riga was the 11th one, so I'm kind of starting finally to get used to that, but still it was more special because all of my friends and family and local people came, and because it's also the opening film, it received more attention, which is fantastic, especially because for an animated film they usually get sidelined and don't really get taken seriously, and so it's really great to finally show this film, because I've finished it in January, and so it took a time to find its festivals, because this is a type of film that needs to go through festivals to find some sort of publicity. And I was really actually honored to be invited by Riga Film Festival, which invited me to be the opening film before all the international acclaim, actually.
Because you'd appeared at several film festivals before, including the Annecy Animation Film Festival, where you'd won a major prize. So this was all in place before that happened, yeah?
It was, yeah. I think it might have even been before the nominations for Annecy. So it was really, really cool that they took me seriously and selected me.
Now, if you could just tell us a little bit about Away and the process of making it, because as I understand it, this is a solo project. You've spent more than 3 years of your time doing it, which sounds absolutely an extraordinary investment, not only of time, but of effort and belief. I mean, to believe in a project through all that time when you don't even have kind of other people to blame or to bounce off or to help you share the burden is absolutely extraordinary, I think. So could you just talk us through the process of where the film idea came from, and then did you decide to do it this way, or was it just that circumstances happened this way?
So I didn't really have any other choice. When I started this project, I was pretty much just a few years out of high school. I didn't have a university diploma. I didn't have many contacts, so I didn't have any people to help me to make this, and so I had to do it myself, and I had a really small budget. I couldn't hire anyone. And actually 3.5 years, which is the time it took to make this film, is really fast for animation. Yeah, even big budget Disney or Pixar films sometimes take 5 years or more and have 1,000 people working on them, and they have $200 million budget. So it's still pretty fast, 3.5 years. And I think pretty much every film takes years to make. And what helped me was that it was my film, it was my story, so I had personal investment in that, so I felt more motivated. I think if I'd just be making like a work for hire, like someone else's story, it would be more difficult. But it was really simple actually. I had some difficulties making some short films before, but this one there were no major setbacks, and it went pretty smoothly. I could have my own schedule. I could take time off whenever I wanted. So yeah, that's basically about the production. But the story of Away is it's a fantasy road trip about this boy who, after crash landing a plane on a desert island, finds himself being chased by this giant dark spirit, and the spirit is trying to eat him, and the boy is trying to escape the spirit and get back home. And along the way he meets various animals, he finds a motorcycle, and so the film is this it doesn't have any dialogue, so it's all visual storytelling, all told through images and sound. And so yeah, the basic idea of the film is about this boy who's trying to reconnect with society. He's basically alone, and he's trying to reach other people. He's trying to find a connection. And some of the animals too are also separated, like the bird is separated from his flock, and it's all about finding a connection. And like I pointed this out, it wasn't really conscious when I started how the themes of the story are a reflection of the story, of the production process of me making this film alone. So it was me kind of on my island trying to escape this monster and to reach the final goal of finishing the film. And now that it's finished, it's like I find many connections with people, and I think people who see the film can share the experience and connect themselves through the film. And I think every film kind of can bring people together and start discussions. And also I mentioned this festival, like Riga Film Festival, which is great that we finally have a really big international festival in Riga, which also brings both people from Latvia, from the Baltic states, and even from further away together, and so it's really fun.
And if I might just ask, where did the germ, the basic idea of the story come from? Because, I mean, what you say about being pursued by a monster, that's like a classic sort of pursuit dream almost, isn't it? Which I guess must lend itself to animated form very well. But to have that sort of level of belief in the story, was the story absolutely set in stone when you started, or did it kind of evolve as you were doing it?
It wasn't set in stone at all. It kept evolving, and this is something I could only afford if I made this film very independently. And so basically, if you have a large team and a large budget, you need to plan out everything thoroughly, and you need to have everyone pretty much on the same page, so there's no arguments about what you're doing. But I could afford to experiment and try things and tell more personal stories and not really even care about the commercial aspects of the film. And the germ of the idea, I just started thinking about things that are easy to produce, that I didn't have. You can pretty much do everything in animation, but some things take more time than others. So I thought I don't want to make this film over 10 years, and I'll just figure out what are simple things to animate. And so it's easy to animate this guy riding a motorcycle. You can just repeat one motion and get loads of footage that way. And so I tried to avoid many characters, so you need to create each character. So that's why he's on this island alone. So, and all these practical decisions really came together, and the story evolved from that. And I also tried to keep it as simple as possible, because if you don't have dialogue, you need to it can easily get confusing for the audience. So I needed a very specific goal for the main character, and So also the fact that there's no dialogue, like it's not too uncommon for animation to have no dialogue, usually in short films, but there are some feature films too without any dialogue. But I wanted it to make sense, so that's why he's alone on this island, and it's only animals that he's interacting with.
I mean, was that a decision from the beginning not to have dialogue as well,
Yeah.
or did it make itself apparent?
So all the short films I made before didn't have dialogue, and so whenever I try to write dialogue, it always sounds very forced and not very natural. So it's just something that I'm not really comfortable with, and maybe in the future I'd like to work maybe with some other writer who can help me with that, but this was the only way I could do it myself.
It's fascinating from what you're saying, because when you hear about the story of this one guy made this feature-length film to the highest possible standards, gave 3.5 years of his life to it, the immediate assumption is, wow, that must have been such an incredible, he must have excluded everything else from his life. But what you're saying is it actually sort of gave you extra freedom to experiment. It gave you freedom to arrange the schedules as you wanted. It gave you the freedom to make big decisions, like there will be no dialogue, or we will shoot it a certain way using certain methods, rather than go through that whole committee process, which I guess usually goes on with the film. So it's very counterintuitive in that way.
Yeah, I think it can actually be faster if you have less people, because sometimes it takes more time to explain what you have in mind rather than to do it yourself. So, and in my film, the ideas can be quite abstract. So I have a feeling that I know that I'm trying to reach, but it's really difficult to explain. Like, it's hard to explain music too. Like, you either feel it or you don't. And it was very freeing. It was really it did get tough sometimes. It's like long hours, but because it's my own film, and it's kind of like I get paid by doing my own hobby, and that really helps. But yeah, I don't want it to make sound like it was really no struggles at all, but. I think I was really lucky also this time. I think not every time someone would try it, it would happen so easily. But it's really I'm really grateful that I got funded by State Culture Capital Foundation in Latvia. So
was that full funding or sort of co-financing?
It was pretty much fully funded. So the film consists of 4 chapters. It's one big story, but each of the chapters has kind of like a mini story, and I funded each of the chapters as a short film. And so I thought it would be no one would trust me to make a feature film without any experience, and so I deliberately split it up. I always planned it as a feature, and I funded each of the chapters separately. And the first chapter was funded by National Film Center in Latvia, and it was I actually distributed that one as a short film in some festivals, and I actually ended up completely remaking that first chapter,
right? Because
after all these years I learned so much, and so the first one just wasn't up to the standards of the later ones.
But I guess it still served kind of a marketing purpose to an extent for you.
Yeah, it was both to prove others how that I can do this, and also for myself, because I wasn't entirely sure that I could do it, and I thought if this project falls apart midway through, I can at least have 1 or 2 chapters that I can show people. So they were kind of also designed to stand on their own. And so so the other chapters were funded by State Culture Capital Foundation, and they gave me complete creative freedom, and so it's.
So what was the total budget then?
The total budget, including the first chapter, which I ended up completely remaking without any additional funds, so the total budget is about 50,000 euros.
Wow.
And
that's real microfinancing by modern standards.
Yeah. It's, I think even for Latvian standards, it's very small, and there's some short films with bigger budgets.
And it's often, well, always the case with filmmakers, but I think particularly with animation. Did you take a lead from other filmmakers? I mean, who inspired you? It'll often be people like, Jan Svankmajer, or were often cited as someone who gives other filmmakers kind of the confidence to try something which might be a bit different or a bit out there. I mean, who were the people that you were referencing while you were thinking about this?
When I grew up, I didn't watch that much animation really. I mostly watched more commercial films, but I watched a lot of art house live action films, and my dad showed me a lot of Kubrick and Hitchcock and many old masters and new masters, and so I guess my creative influences really came more from live action filmmaking rather than animation.
And from the sort of American filmmaking tradition, I guess.
Many directors, maybe the biggest influence is Alfonso Cuarón. He's a Mexican director. He's won many Academy Awards and for Roma last year, and Gravity, and Children of Men, and he's famous for these long takes he does, where he doesn't cut, so the camera is really moving in one continuous take for 3 or 4 minutes, and it creates this really immersive experience. And I felt like this technique is really great for 3D animation, and it hasn't been explored. And my other influences maybe are Paul Thomas Anderson, especially the earlier films, because he's known for the kinetic energy, and also maybe one animator that was a huge influence is Hayao Miyazaki. He's a Japanese director, maybe most famous for Spirited Away, and so a lot of influence from Japanese animation actually.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people seem to have commented on when they've seen the film, that there does seem to be this slight Japanese flavor to it.
Yeah, it's there are some Japanese directors who really allow themselves to take a break and create these moments of stillness and just shots of nature, and I think it creates this great balance between the fast-paced action scenes and it, so that was an influence. But
I mean, it also seems to be the absolute antithesis of, I guess, what most people automatically think of as animation films these days, the Disney Pixar type of, it's an animal with attitude who's learning the value of friendship, is usually the plot. But they are relentless in that every 10 seconds something has to happen, right? And what you're saying is that these pauses, people will still accept these and kind of live in them.
Yeah, and I think it can be just too overwhelming to have this relentless pace. And actually this film I started in 2015, and it was around that time I first started going to these animation festivals. So at that time I really actually started being influenced by more of the independent animation, by many European directors who make short films, and most people don't know their films outside of animation community, and there's so many films that really don't care about the commercial aspects of the filmmaking, and they just care about personal expression, and so I found it really freeing not to worry about it. Though I think my film can be quite commercial, because it's so very. It's kind of it's in the middle of this art house and this family film, and I think it's also a good way to, people keep asking me what's the target audience, and it's kind of hard to say. I made the film first for myself, so I wanted to make something that I would like to watch myself, but I think it's also a good way for parents to educate their kids about other types of films, because the story is quite simple and easy to follow. But I think I try to experiment more with more not so conventional filmmaking language techniques, and so it's the camera is very it's not just practical. It has some more of a, dare I say, poetic expression, and so like my parents showed me like many like great films that most mainstream audiences ignore, and I think it's really important to show children, younger children especially, like different types of films, and show that it's like just how vast the expression in cinema can be.
I mean, I agree. I think it is very important, and we sometimes or often underestimate the power of children's imaginations. And when you think back to how you felt as a child at certain times, as you say, encountering an animation, it can be really, really terrifying, delightful. Everything is maximized by 10 compared to our sort of adult minds, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some parents might be afraid that their children might not understand it, but I think children understand much more than most adults consider. It's like most of the best films are very intuitive. You don't really need any instructions. It's like they really like speak to you directly, and I think it's like sometimes you don't understand everything the first time, but then you grow up and watch the same film again, and you see different things. And I think my film is also kind of like that maybe children might see one thing and their parents might see something else.
And so once the production process had finished and you'd cut it the way you wanted it cut, as you said, you had total creative control. Where was the first screening? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the initial reaction you got and maybe the subsequent reactions, because you must have at that point made some sort of assessment as to what this film's appeal was, or how it was going to live,
Yeah. So while I was making the film, I showed it to some friends and family just for their honest advice, and I showed it to like an official screening in the winter last year. But the first official screening was in Zagreb in Croatia in June, and I think it was really embraced because there are many independent short films made in animation, but most of the features are kind of made with, even in Europe, for American standards it's small budget, but it's still kind of like this industry that the features are made. And I think the animators really appreciated how you can make independent films on your own. And so many festivals keep asking me to give presentations about this process, especially in countries where the industry hasn't really developed yet. And I think actually in Latvia, even though our industry is very small, I think it has some advantages that we have. If there is a big industry, maybe filmmakers after graduating automatically start working in some commercial production company, but because we don't have that many options for that, we tend to experiment more and find new ways how to make films and come up with new ideas. So I think now in these places where there isn't an industry, it's a good time, because now the technology is allowed like pretty much everyone to make films, and you can learn different skills online, and there are softwares, great softwares that are free, and so I think it's really exciting.
And I was just wondering, I mean, sitting there in the cinema, lights out, everyone's looking at your work. I mean, what feeling did you get? Did you get that kind of buzz or fear or what? Because it must be something that very few people get to actually experience.
I was kind of, I was a little bit happy, but mostly I was scared. Yeah, of course. It took me so much time, and I hadn't shown it to that many people outside of my close like friends and family, and they might not be as honest as just the regular members of public. So, but I think the reception was pretty good. Yeah, even from people who don't make films. So, and after that it went to many festivals. It went to Annecy, which is the biggest animation festival. And after
did it surprise you when you won the award there, or?
Absolutely, it surprised me just to be selected, because all of my short films were rejected before, and then it was selected, and then it won. That it was the first time they gave out this prize. It's the Contrechamp Award for, I guess, for more of the. It's hard. I don't even know what it stands for, but it's not for the, like the.
It's almost like originality.
Originality,
yeah.
or like younger
kind
filmmakers.
Of against the grain. Yeah. It's something like that,
yeah.
isn't it? The Against the Grain Award.
So yeah, and after that, like all the other festivals kind of started writing to me and wanted to invite me, and I have some also distributors in regular screenings here in Latvia. It will start screening in the 15th of November. And we have distributors in Germany and Poland and also the US, and so the distributors in US will screen it in LA to qualify for the award season. So
and we heard just a couple of days ago that it's made the long list for the Academy Awards.
Yeah, it's one of 32 features that are on the list, and. It's one of most of the other films are really huge, like 200 million budgeted films, and so I don't know.
I could have made 100 of these films.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I hope they don't forget the little guy, and like I don't get lost in the crowd, but it's just exciting to be part of the conversation there.
And what do you think your reaction would have been if at the beginning of this process, when you decided you're going to make this film, they'd said it's going to be screened in LA to be eligible for the Academy Awards? I mean,
I didn't think about it that much. Like I had some hopes that it would get success, but I had also some failures before, so I didn't expect that much. So,
and what would your advice be to maybe not just animators or filmmakers, but people with a creative idea that they wish to pursue in general as a result of this process? I mean, what have you learned about yourself or about your craft?
I think maybe some people think that they need to understand everything before they start. And I think no one can really understand everything. Like, you just need to know the basics and start doing it, and then you kind of can learn on the way. Maybe some jobs you can't really apply this thinking to some jobs that maybe endanger other people or can have like serious effects on other people. But if it's like this small project that I'm making myself, I think it's the best way is actually to learn things is by doing them, and for me it was also why I wanted to do everything myself. So now that on my next project, when I have maybe a small team to help me, I can talk with them more easily. That I've gone through all the processes myself. I understand what the composer wants and what the editor and what the animator wants. So I think it's a good idea to learn the basics. If you're like a leader of some team, of a team, it's a good idea to learn the basics of what each member does. And I think the basics are quite fast to learn.
Well, it reminds me of the comment that Orson Welles made when he went to make Citizen Kane. And he said that basically he knew nothing about cinematography, but everything, all the basics that he needed to know, he learned off Greg Toland in about an afternoon. And he was of the idea that this applies to pretty much everything. You can learn the basics very, very quickly. And after that, it's up to you to sort of prove your originality.
Yeah. And then it takes 10,000 hours to be the master. But I think the basics you can learn like in a week.
And do you have your next project in mind, or is it too early to talk about that?
I have my next project. It's called Flow. It's another feature-length animated film, and it's an adaptation of a short film I made. The short film is called Aqua, and the story is about a cat who who's afraid of water, and he wakes up and there's a huge wave and the whole world is flooded. And so the cat has to learn how to overcome his fears. So I compared Away. The story of Away is about this boy alone on an island. And so it's a reflection of the production process of that film. And in Flow, the cat will meet other animals and they'll kind of fight at some moments and they'll support each other at some other moments. So I'm thinking that it will be a reflection of this slightly bigger production process where I'll make a film with other people. Mm-hmm. So it will be kind of like about working in a group and how that works.
And somehow I think you'll have a bit less trouble attracting financing to this one than maybe to Away.
Hopefully, yeah. Like I didn't have major setbacks even for Away. It was a really small budget and it went really smoothly. I didn't even ask for much, but
you'll probably have to be fighting the monster this one.
I think it will be easier, yeah. I've already met with some producers and yeah. So, but I still want to keep it kind of independent. There are some directors who make like this really small indie film that gets some recognition and then they jump into like this major Hollywood filmmaking and they get overwhelmed because the contrast between these two ways of working is just too big. So I'm trying to make this transition more gradual. So the first one was just one person and the second film will be maybe 5 people. And so I can just do it like safer. So yeah.
Well, it sounds like a very sensible plan, and again relies on the idea that you can take your time. You don't have to rush everything.
Yeah. It's I just like if I spend so much time on the film, I want it to be good, and I want it to like maintain the control. Like I'm learning how to be not such a complete control freak, but I still want to like tell my own story, and I'm trying to find that balance.
Well, congratulations again. Good luck with Away. We'll be cheering for you if it makes the Academy Awards. And thanks for making time in what I imagine is a very busy schedule at the moment for speaking to us here at the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was produced by SSC Riga. If you'd like to learn more about the topic, visit the open course schedule at SSC Riga Executive Education. For more podcasts, find us on Spotify, iTunes, or the platform of your choice. Remember, share this episode with your friends and colleagues.